Salutations, everyone. Welcome to the Unexpected Cosmology. And we have a special guest tonight. JohnQ is back. And John, you were here 4 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago. I lose total track of time. And
something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and welcome back. It was a really good interview that we had. And of course, you were talking about going through the details of the book that you had released with us, Q in the Millennial Kingdom. And at the time, you were telling me that there was another article you were working on. You're starting the writing process again. I think you had taken like 11 months off in between. And it was on the Ark of the Covenant. And I was, of course, and also the Eclipse. And we'll be talking about that tonight, which we just had about a week ago or so, a couple weeks ago. And of course, you published it. So I brought you back immediately on to talk about it. So welcome. And
yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I kind of want to get right into it. And so you can see here, this is, of course, my new website. I had to change websites for everybody who is curious. JohnQ is featured on the Unexpected Cosmology. You can look right over here in this picture over here of the Ark of the Covenant. It actually says Millennial Kingdom plus Q right above it. And so all these articles, there's only 3 here, but there's more in the series. I think, what are we on now? We on
Part 9.
Part 9. All right. So I'm going to start out by reading the first page of the article for everyone. So those who have not gotten a taste of JohnQ's very entertaining writing style can do so. And I also want to point out that for everybody listening, coming to this channel, that I myself am not an anon. I don't follow Q, but I would find it ridiculous to not look into different ideas that are presented to me. And in fact, John, you came around a couple of years ago to the Unexpected Cosmology, and since he's come around, I've learned a lot. I mean, I love hearing the latest news from Q or what's going on in the world of Anon. I'm always asking, what's going on, with Trump and all this kind of stuff. So here's his article right here, his latest one called An Unexpected Rabbit Hole, the Ark of the Covenant and Q, which is, of course, what we're going to be talking about tonight. A lot to get to. Here's what it says on the first page. As you can see, he published this on March 17th. So exactly 1 month ago, really, because today's the 18th. It says, we are in a theater, a play, where evil can be seen for what it is, but God is also seen in his grace and magnificence. Juan O. Savin. Of course, that was a quote. It is time for the 9th article in this series. I guess that answers my question about what number this was. About time, you might exclaim. While I will concede that it has been a while, 11 months to be exact, I will not concede that it is late. After all, I am a Calvinist, and a Calvinist is never late, nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he is predestined to. I find that kind of funny. I used to be a Calvinist myself. I'm no longer a Calvinist, but because I used to be a Calvinist, there's some things that I have held on to that, I haven't been able to let go of. And for me, it's a mystery between free will and predestination. And I don't deny that there isn't some sort of, overriding of the plan where Yah is in complete control. And but as I like to point out to all the Calvinists out there, that if we don't accept Calvinism, it's because we were predestined not to. So there's nothing we can do about it.
Exactly.
Anyways, moving on, second paragraph. So here I am writing this article at exactly the time I was predestined to do so by the one who lives outside of space and time. Very good. The sovereign most high Elohim, ruler over all things. Now, I think everybody on this channel knows what Elohim is. It's the Hebrew word, the modern Hebrew Masoretic word for God, Elohim. The beginning and the end, the first and the last. Yahuwah, or Yahuwah, or Yahweh for some of you out there, is a master storyteller. And I love the way John pronounces it too. I'm sure he will tonight. He knows not only how to accomplish his purposes, but he will also accomplish them. And in doing so, he is weaving an incredible story with all the twists and turns, foreshadowing drama, romance, suspense, and action you would expect to find in a story for the ages. If you pay attention, you will notice he is leaving Easter eggs, for the lack of a better term. And the I like that phrasing. For everyone out there, John Q is not telling us to go worship Easter, as he says, for lack of a better term, in every nook and cranny for us to find. I recently discovered one of these Easter eggs in a rather unexpected rabbit hole. I guess, I love this paragraph here. I guess most rabbit holes are unexpected, or at least by now I should expect them to be, which begs the question, if rabbit holes are usually unexpected, thereby leading you to expect unexpected rabbit holes to materialize, are they in fact unexpected? This is screwing with my mind because here we are at the unexpected cosmology, where I specifically put X marks the spot for unexpected, but that is a rabbit hole, although be it an unexpected one, best left to further exploration for another time. So that's how he introduces this article. I love your writing style, John. I enjoy your articles very much. And I hope that more and more people will discover you. So before we get into this, of course, you can be found at The Unexpected Cosmology. We sell your book here. Where else can we find you for anyone else out there?
Yeah, I am very active on True Social. It's at John_Q_Adams. Someone, by the time I was able to create an account, someone had already taken that name and they haven't used it at all. I've been watching it. They haven't used it. So I had to go with the John_Q_Adams. I'm also back on Twitter or X now. Not as active over there, but I'm trying to be more active. That's kind of the battleground, so to speak, in the information war. So I am a bit more active over there. My original account was suspended over there, which I am very proud of. So you can find me at JohnQ over on Twitter. So yeah.
So if you go to True Social and you find a John Q there and he's inactive, then it's not the real John Q. So you want to find the underscore, correct?
Correct. Yeah. And then obviously, Unexpected Cosmology, which we already talked about. You can always get in touch with me there on the Unexpected Cosmology Discord, and I publish my articles on a Substack, johnqadams.substack.com.
Let me just quickly say, too, for those who are starting to pour in right now, and there's always the inevitable comments about QAnon, which, John, I know you're very familiar with at this point. And let me just say from my end, one of the things that has amazed me about QAnon is that the sheer number of people who have woken up and come to the truth through QAnon. And it was in learning that, and at first when QAnon first started kind of making the rounds, like, was it 5-6 years ago? I don't even know how long ago. I was like, okay, here we go with another, this whole narrative. But I've been absolutely amazed to see how many people have come through. And so for that reason, I have been more curious, more gracious, more merciful in wanting to listen in. Just for everyone out there listening right now, coming in and going, oh, here we go with QAnon again. Anyways, John, handing it over to you. So take us. Do you want me to change to your screen?
Not yet. When I have something to show, I'll go ahead and show it. But yeah, I'm gonna my plan is to kind of initially walk through like my my approach. Like, how do I gather information and then put it in, organize it and put it into thoughts, and then put it into my head and then put it down on paper. But before we do that, because all of the anons out there, those who follow Q, are screaming right now. I'll just set the record straight so that they can feel better. But there is no QAnon. There is Q and there are anons. And a lot of the things that have been associated to Q are things that anons have put out there that are not accurate, disinformation or misinformation. And some anons are, you could say, plants, deep state players. And so, you can't just blindly lump things that are associated with QAnon to Q. It is, I would say, if anyone is interested in it all, you can read the Q drops themselves, and you don't have to go to the Chan boards to do that. There's several different aggregate sites like Q Alerts, .app. That's my favorite one. And there's several others out there. And there's a lot of anons who are really no longer anonymous. They've now come out. They've put their name out. They've now full time they continue to dig, and they put out their research, and they'll do podcasts, or they'll do shows on Rumble or YouTube or what have you. And so some really good ones to follow if you're trying to find more information about that. They'll put articles on Substack, what have you. It's a wealth of information out there if you know where to look. Rumble has a lot of good stuff. Badlands Media is another good one that has several anons. They have many shows that they do on a weekly basis that are, they're diving into the Q drops. They're showing how some of the Q drops are relevant and applicable to current events and things like that. So there's a lot of information out there. Q says, to do your own research, and not just, blindly, trust what others say. Make the decision for yourself.
And of course, this is what qualifies my statement, as you said, that if I had come out and said, "Oh, I am totally QAnon," like I'm neck deep in QAnon. I studied, day and night, and you go, clearly there is no QAnon, right? So clearly you're full of it. So that I purposely put that in there too, because anyways, for me, it's QAnon. I'm not an anon, but now that I have made myself totally uncool amongst all the cool kids who are anons, let's get into this. So, sorry for that interruption. You were talking about your process of how you're going through this.
Yeah. So, I have a family. I have a full-time day job, so I don't have a whole lot of time, to really do a whole lot of digging. So, kind of my approach and my style is, I will absorb information as I can. When you basically, one of the things that taught the best thing that Q did for me in my life was kind of really teach me how to research and how to get around censorship, how to get around, the Google search engines, or, to bypass those things where they're hiding and gatekeeping information. That's one of the best things, that the Q-op did for a lot of people who weren't already, in that world and kind of knew how to do that. Just normies who, are discovered Q, and then they're like, okay, well, they saw how the anons did things. They learned, they started doing their own research, learned how to bypass the Google censorship, and find information. So, really, my approach is I absorb information, and as I'm absorbing that information as it comes to me, and I'm not always able to actively go out and search for it, I just have figured out places to go now to get information that I have learned over time that is, somewhat trustworthy. And even then, I don't just blindly trust it. And then I'll put new information into categories. If it's something that I don't know, I'll put it in an unconfirmed box in my head. If it's something that I already know to be false, I'll put that in a not true box. And if it's something that I've developed enough information that I can, at least confidently know to the best extent that we can know something. Some things, there are certain things that you can know certainly, and then there are some things that, you're pretty sure. You're sure enough that you can say, yeah, I think this is true. And when I get enough things in kind of my unconfirmed box that correlates each other or what have you, they'll move into like a confirmed box. And my confirmed boxes, um, somehow I'm at times able to make connections of confirmed boxes and come to just kind of connect those dots. And I don't know how. I, one of my favorite favorite uh, uh, things that or I forget his name now, but he put out a marriage seminar. And he talked about the difference between men's brains and women's brains, and it's quite true how men's brains, they put things in boxes, and then they go into that box when they want to think about that thing. And women's brains, they're just like a bunch of wires connecting, and they can just make all those connections. Somehow I am able to connect things between different boxes sometimes, and
You're talking about multitasking, right?
yes, yeah. So when I get enough of those connections, make enough of those connections, I can then start. Maybe sometimes it'll be a whole new box that I'll put all those things in, and they'll kind of link together and cooperate. And since I've been writing these articles, I've been just essentially, that's where I'm cataloging that stuff in a OneNote file, and then I'll start writing. I have enough to. I'll start writing when I get an inspiration to start writing. Like this last time, I just had, between articles 8 and 9, I just had no inspiration to write anything. There wasn't anything that was like inspiring me enough to actually put it into an article. I don't worry about that. Like, I guess probably because I'm not a full-time writer, I don't think, oh man, I've got writer's block or anything like that. It's just kind of a sense of when the time comes, I'll be inspired again, and I'll write again. So that's kind of my approach.
You had mentioned how some things you immediately know are untrue. So what are some things that you like? How would you determine what is untrue, or what are some things that would come along within? I mean, the context here is anon or QAnon. So what are some things that would come along where you go, okay, that's not true. That's information that's being spread around that I know that that's not true.
The first test is it biblical? Like, can I support this with scripture? That's really my first test. If it's counter to scripture, yeah, I know it's untrue. If it's not necessarily counter to scripture, but it's not necessarily, confirmed by scripture, then it'll go in my unconfirmed box. So that's one thing. If it's information that, so for example, when I first discovered flat Earth, though, and I have learned because of flat Earth, because of discovering that the flat Earth is true, that we live on a plane, I have learned that that experience helped me to recognize cognitive dissonance, because that was the most extreme example of cognitive dissonance when it first came in, because anons that I'm following, I came into Q very late. It was after the election 2020, when I started researching it. And, early of 21, I really started coming across a lot of anons and things who I had learned to trust what they were putting out, because I was able to kind of back check, and it made sense. It lined up with the things that I was able to check. And they're also, dropping, seemingly random, flat Earth things. And at first it was annoying, right? It was really annoying. And then it got to the point where I was getting upset, because if they think that, then maybe all the stuff that I'm pretty sure is true now, is all BS, because, of the person who's presenting the information. They think the Earth is flat, right? But before Q, I would have let cognitive dissonance win. It would have won. But because of researching the stuff that I was discovering through Q and the Q drops, I had to kind of develop that skill of, okay, I'm not putting this in my untrue box. I'm going to put this in my unconfirmed box, and I'm going to look into it until I figure out which box I'm going to move it to. And so I did. And but boy, the cognitive dissonance was strong on that one. So I've recognized really how cognitive dissonance rears its ugly head.
Yeah, that's the only way to learn. Yeah, I'm identifying with everything you're saying as a writer myself, and thinking of like extra biblical books. I just put on my website this week like 90 newly edited extra biblical books, and you go through those, and there's all this. Not all of it is upfront synchronized with the Bible, and I'll go through this, and I'll get this piece of information in this book. I'm like, what do I do with this? And this is where most people immediately, if they don't know what to do with the information, they like, okay, I'm tossing this whole thing. And I always think that's such a shame, because it's one of those things where, yeah, eventually other information comes along, and the pieces fit. Now, I just want to point out really quickly, because we're going to be talking about the Ark of the Covenant tonight, obviously. And a topic I find fascinating, particularly as it deals with the millennial kingdom. Now, just today, I was preparing and writing a paper on Noah's Ark and how it deals with the millennial kingdom. And of course, we're going to be talking about Ron White. And Ron White's other big discovery, aside from the Ark of the Covenant, was Noah's Ark. He discovered both arks. And of course, he's highly, by every single gatekeeper out there, every single like creationist ministry, they all attack this guy. And okay, so speaking of cognitive dissonance, I find it interesting that when you go out to the Turkey side of Noah's Ark, you see crosses everywhere there. You see Crusader crosses and Byzantine crosses. And what is very clear by this is that all the people of the Byzantine era, as well as the Crusaders and that whole medieval era, they all knew where the Ark was. They were all going out there to visit it, and you see a lot of evidence for this. And yet, the history books have completely scrubbed any mention of Noah's Ark. It's never been discovered. Nobody knows where it is, right? And so I'm looking at all these websites. I'm going through people talking, oh, this is so amazing. All the Crusaders were there, the Byzantine Empire and stuff. And then they go right back to this thing of like, it was only recently discovered and nobody knew it. That's like amazing cognitive dissonance right there. I'm only bringing this up because we're talking about Ron Wyatt tonight. And I'm assuming he's coming into this conversation. Of course, yeah. I've read ahead in your article, which great art. Anyways, sorry to cut you off.
No worries.
What were you saying? Getting back into it.
Yeah. So this article was kind of like one of those moments where that's why I titled The Unexpected Rabbit Hole, because it was quite unexpected. Around that same time, I had been watching some Trey Smith videos. I really enjoy his stuff that he puts out, and one of the videos that he had put out was on Psalms, the Psalms 22 passage where it talks about how Mashiach, basically Yahushua quoted this verse when he was, Psalms 26:1. He quoted that when he was on the cross. Trey Smith was presenting about how, further on down is verse 6, I think it is, where he's talking about, he says, "But I am a worm, not a man, scorned by mankind, despised by the people." And he talked about how, it's referencing this very specific worm, and he goes into all that, and that was quite fascinating. I had not come across that before. And then at the same time, around the same time, I was, the eclipse was coming up. This was kind of in like, January, February timeframe. Of course, the eclipse was coming up in March. I guess it was April. Yeah, it was in April. It was this month, just a week or two ago, and people were, putting out a lot of doom and gloom on the eclipse. Right? It's an X over America. God is, marking us for destruction and a lot of stuff like that. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to start researching this a little bit more and dive into that a little bit more. And so I was finding some interesting things about that, and I'll get into that a little bit. And then around that same time, James O'Keefe had, and I'll go ahead and present if you would like.
Yeah, please do.
Share my screen. Yeah. Let's see here. Share
I'm just
screen.
scrolling through your article right now. So
yeah, no worries. Hit share.
All right, added.
All right, yeah. So about that same time, James O'Keefe had come out. He posted a post on social media, and it was this is the picture here. His post says, a perfect replicant of the Ark of the Covenant. 2,700 hours of labor, 6 pounds of gold. And I thought, okay, there's some chatter about that, and I thought that's interesting, but I didn't really look into it a whole lot more. Well, it was probably a few weeks to a month later or so when I came across. I was on the Ingersoll Lockwood website, and if anyone is not familiar with the Ingersoll Lockwood website, and Noel has, I think, talked about before about I think you did some presentations on Ingersoll Lockwood and the Trump time travel books and stuff. So there's a Ingersoll Lockwood back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, was an author who wrote a few books, which indicate it's definitely foreshadowing, at least, or there's a lot of very incredible coincidences that, it talks about. One of them is the last president, and is talking about a president, the last president of the United States, and it's a lot of parallels can be drawn to Trump. There's the marvelous Baron Trump's underground adventures and things like that, and there's just so many connections. So the Ingersoll Lockwood website is not necessarily affiliated with that. It portrays itself as a DoD contractor type of organization, but it has all kinds of Q related references and links to things. And it says straight on the front of its website. And in fact, let me I'll go to that. I think I have a link to that website down here. Actually, no, I'll just pull it up. IngersollLockwood.com. And it straight up says, on its website, because a lot of people had been associating it with QAnon, and it straight up says Ingersoll Lockwood is oops, I am not sharing the right thing. I had to stop and reshare. Stop screen, present, share screen. Here we go, share. So here's the Ingersoll Lockwood website, and it straight up says here, Ingersoll Lockwood Inc. is a nonpartisan group of Americans with distinguished careers serving a great nation. We don't believe in the QAnon conspiracy, nor would we ever. Please tell this to all. Team IL. Well, someone who is familiar with Q would obviously they would not claim to be affiliated with QAnon because Q themselves, the Q drops themselves say, you know, there is no Q, there is Q, there are nons. You know, kind of what I had said earlier in this show. You know, there are those who are trying to associate, you know, crazy stuff with Q, so, because they can't attack the source of the information. So this is their standard playbook, right? So anyone who's been researching Q this would not deter them at all. There's some of the nuggets here. Is Ingersoll Lockwood is located at 1717 Pennsylvania Avenue. It's Suite 1025, which that's 10 or 1, and a 2 and a 5 is 7. That's 17. So there's 3 17s there. Various other interesting numbers. And there's a lot of interesting links in the in the Ingersoll Lockwood website. And one of those links, and here's one here, is a link to the Wyatt Archaeological Research, and it takes you directly to their part of the Ark of the Covenant. And when that was drawn to my attention, I pretty much fell out of my chair, because now to me, that says there's a connection. There's a connection to Q and the Ark of the Covenant. And so now I'm like, okay, now I need to figure out what that connection is. So I started diving in.
Actually, before you do, I'm kind of curious if you know, why was James O'Keefe at Mar-a-Lago to begin with? Like, what are his connections with Trump? If you know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know all of. I mean, I know O'Keefe has met with Trump several times. Supposedly this event, and here I'll share my other screen again. I guess I should have figured out beforehand how to share the whole thing.
It's annoying.
Window.
Yeah, if I go to a different window, I have to shut it down, and it's a black screen for a while. It's not a problem.
Got it.
Unless you have them all on, like, the same page, basically.
Yeah, I got you. Okay, so let's try this again. Share screen.
All right.
So what I'm sharing here, this was the link this is what the link to the Ingersoll Lockwood website takes you to. This White Archaeological Research, and if you look up here, and it's hard to see, it's probably you can't see because we're covering, but it basically White Archaeological Research, it's an acronym for war. So that's quite interesting. But so back to James O'Keefe. He was at Mar-a-Lago. Supposedly there was an event or some sort of event there where I can't remember the name of the group off the top of my head, but they had presented this supposed replica of the Ark of the Covenant to President Trump, and it was there. It's there on display. And James O'Keefe had, posed with the pictures. There were others that were there that also put pictures out with it.
Do you know offhand what the official explanation is to why he was presented with the Ark of the Covenant?
Yeah, I do. I don't. I don't remember that off the top of my head.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bizarre. I'm trying to think of like a scenario where I would be presented with the Ark of the Covenant. I mean, that's pretty bizarre. So
yeah, it is. It is. I mean, so when the Ingersoll Lockwood website linked to the White Archaeological Research website and Ark of the Covenant, and I had heard about this, about Ron Wyatt's discovery, I don't know, once or twice in my life, but I had never been interested enough to even look into it before. But this,
it's very compelling. It's a fascinating story.
Yeah. So I did. I dove into it. There's, documentaries out there that you can find. A lot of articles linked here on this website. The documentary, I think, was linked on this
And
website.
and let me just say about Ron Wyatt that there's some things I really love about Ron Wyatt. Number one, he was a Sabbath keeper. He ate
Hmm.
clean. He was Torah in almost every sense of the word. And for these reasons, he's mocked and ridiculed. People, you look at Ron Wyatt and they'll be like, well, he was in a cult. And I'm like, well, what was the cult? Oh, he kept the Sabbath. He kept the fourth commandment. Okay. All right. Yeah. I guess that makes you in a cult. But the thing about Ron Wyatt is that I would totally discredit his arc. I'd go, this guy's a wacko. If I heard just about the Ark of the Covenant, except for the fact that he discovered Mount Sinai, the
Hmm.
very mount in Saudi Arabia that people are flocking to now, and they don't give Ron Wyatt credit for this anymore. But he went over there. He was the guy that he went over there. He showed all the evidence for Mount Sinai. He was the guy that discovered I should say rediscovered he rediscovered the Red Sea crossing, and he went down and he showed the chariot wheels, all this kind of stuff, to the point that it's not even really debated anymore. People just know, yeah, that's the Red Sea crossing. He discovered Sodom and Gomorrah, and now this is heavily criticized by young Earth creationists, creation ministries, and you have to ask, why are they doing this when he discovered an element of Genesis? Well, when you actually go to Sodom and Gomorrah, the problem is that he's pointing out entire, like a melted city. He's showing ziggurats and other things like that, where if you acknowledge that that is legitimate, then you have problems, because then you start seeing melted cities all over the world. But I digress. And what else did he discover? He discovered a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And I personally think that and so that right there, people are like, okay, this guy's shady, and I'm like, well, maybe, but I personally think it's because Yah was looking to bring these things to light, and he was looking for one person who was willing and who was worthy. And it was like the one guy who was eating clean, keeping the Sabbath, that kind of stuff. He's like, I'm going to have you do this for me. So, anyways, all that to say is he has so many. Oh yeah, Noah was the other one, of course, and I would just research Noah's Ark today. I'm like, this is totally legit. They actually found that Noah was probably anywhere from a 15 to a 30-foot giant. Just looking at the evidence over there, credible stuff. And looking at all that information, I look at the Ark of the Covenant and go, yeah, this is. I don't think he was lying about that. Like, why would he show all this evidence and then and the very fact he said he found it, but he couldn't show the video footage was out of a pure fear of Yah, and the fact that angels came and told him that it had to remain hidden. So anyways, I just wanted to clarify that, put that out there. Yeah, Ron White, Ark of the Covenant, go. Back to you.
Yeah. So I started digging into the information he had put out there, and there's, like I said, there is so much information. I link a lot of that, the documentary and a lot of other things in my article, and so you can go there and you can check out those links and check those out. I too found his story very, very credible. It's sometimes the most credible stories are the most unbelievable, you know. But just watching him and listening to him, like, the fact that he wasn't made famous, and the fact that he was shunned and censored, and I say at one point in my article, his name should be a household name, right? But
Yep.
it's not.
He's the real life Indiana Jones.
Yeah, he is. He's a real life Indiana Jones. So during the process of researching him, I also came across a prophecy by Kim Clement, and I do give Kim Clement some weight. In part 2 of my article series, part 2, I talk about some of the prophecies that Kim Clement gave regarding Trump, regarding Q, and regarding the information war, new kind of war that America would find themselves in. It all tied in. He gave these prophecies, years before Q, back in the early 2000s and the early teens. Q didn't start posting until October 28th of 2017. And I think by that point, Kim Clement had already passed. I think he died before Trump was elected, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, a lot of people know about the Kim Clement Trump prophecies, but what is it? What did he say about Q? I'm a little rusty on that.
Yeah. So if let me actually, I will go to my let's see. I'll go to my part 2 here. And of course, it wants me to subscribe because I'm not signed in on this particular tab. No thanks. And we'll pull that up. Let's see. Oops. All right. It's not gonna let me. It's gonna ask me to sign in. Here we go. Okay.
It always does that when I'm live too. It like
Yeah.
never asks me to sign in, but it knows when I'm live. I'm like, come on.
Here we go. All right. So that was part 2.
I don't think we talked about this in our last. I mean, he came up in the last interview, I think, but I don't think we talked about his prophecies at Q.
Yeah. So one of the things he had said was that right here he was praying, nothing unusual. Suddenly behind me, starting behind my back and going in the form of an arrow, were hundreds of thousands of people. And as I turned around, and I was stunned at what I saw. This was not just a mere dream. This was a vision. So I raised my hands like this, and he raised his hands, and every one of them raised their hands. I looked back, and they were doing the same thing. I shouted, and they all shouted. They were one. They were one party of people. One of the big things that Q emphasizes is where we go one, we go all, which is it's a phrase that if you do look into it, it's a phrase that's on the ship's bell of JFK Senior's boat, his favorite boat. He had a bell, and emblazoned on that was where we go when we go all. So that's a connection there. It continued until I realized that in the unity of these, amongst them stood one that God had set aside to be the leader of this nation. I could not quite see his face because that was not allowed, because there was a mist that covered all the people. He was among them. He was amongst them. This is, if you continue on with his prophecies, this is talking about President Trump. And in my opinion, this is talking about President Trump. And President Trump is part of this movement. He is in the Q drops. He's known as Q plus. So he was amongst them, and there was a kind of a mist that covered all the people. And the Spirit of God made me look, and the Spirit of God said, "This man will throttle the enemies of Israel. This man will throttle the enemies of the West." Now, when Kim, I don't know this. I'm not going to put this in Kim Clement's words in his mouth. A lot of people, when they hear Israel, they think of a nation state that has nothing to do with the people that Yah loves. What is Israel now? Israel, the Old Testament says that Israel, we are all Israel. The believers are Israel, right? In the New Testament, that's quite clear. So when he says this man will throw all the enemies of Israel, even if Kim Clement thinks that it's talking about the nation state of Israel, the current nation state of Israel, if it really is Yah giving this prophecy, then Yah isn't talking about the nation state of Israel. I would say Yah is talking about his people, right? This man will throttle the enemies of the West. So he's talking about President Trump here. There are highly embarrassing moments that are about to occur for many politicians in this nation. There will be a shaking among the Democrats, but unsettling for the Republicans. Why is God doing this? For God says, I am dissatisfied with what emerges from both parties. So this, until the Q movement came up, like among there, the among conservative, you know, Christian, people, they just went along with, like, they were Republicans and they didn't really ever question the Republican Party. The majority of them. Q has now awakened many of these people who, they know, they see the Republican Party now, and I'm one of them, as more dangerous than the Democrat Party, because it's all one uniparty, but they're the front that is, pretending to be, the good guys, right? But they're not. So they're more dangerous, right? They're the wolf in sheep's clothing, so to speak. So here it is again. There's a nation itching for a new kind of war with America. They will shout, "Impeach, impeach," they say. And that's interesting. He said impeach twice, and President Trump was impeached twice. But nay. So President Trump was impeached twice, acquitted twice. This nation shall come very subtly, talking about the nation that's itching for a new kind of war with America. But this nation shall not come in the time of President Obama. They shall come when this new one arises, my David, that I have set aside for this nation. And they shall say, what is your plan for this giant? And he will take a simple stone, remember the name, and he will hold it up, and they will laugh at him. But the plan is so brilliant, says the Lord, it could only have been given by me. And of course, the Q plan is called the plan, right? So a lot of connections here, but that's not even the biggest connection. And you're going to have to skip forward here until I can find the biggest connection to Kim Clement and Q. Here's some other great ones. The enemy will do everything in his power to put a witch in the White House. The hands of once compassionate women have cooked their children. Literally, when you start diving into the abortion industry and the food industry, and you start understanding that there are Sinomex plants strategically placed next to Planned Parenthood sites, and you research natural flavors and what that really is, and what goes into some of our food, literally, we have been eating our own children, right? And here's Kim Clement saying that their children have become food for them. And here he says, your children will no longer be food. You shall not use them and take them out of the womb. There's a prophecy here about the end of abortion. And I firmly believe that is in our very near future, that we will have equal protection under the law for all humanity, both born and unborn. I firmly believe that just as we as a nation had to go through the abolition of slavery, although we're under slavery, under a different form of slavery, debt slavery. We will have, in my opinion, because of my eschatological views, I firmly believe that very imminently abortion will be done away with, and the ending of Roe v. Wade was only the start of that. So, he talks about justice. He talks about some Supreme Court, how there's going to be some embarrassing in the Supreme Court, in the highest courts of the land. But God has the whole thing planned out. All right. So I need to, let me do a Control F and let's see here, A and Q. Here it is right here. All right. So he talked about one of Kim Clement's prophecies right here. This is the one that really ties to Q. And he talks about this weapon is in a human mind. And this weapon, which is in the human mind, came to me when I saw some alphabetical letters. I saw some letters at first. I thought it was A to Z. Now, this is a puzzle to me right now, he said. But God said to me, focus on this so that the mystery can be unfolded. The letters were A and Q. That is all I saw. And he said, that is where it is at. He, meaning Yahweh, said that is where it is at. And that was Kim Clement in June of 2012. So A and Q, that's Q and the Anons. And the weapon of human mind, that's information warfare, that's fifth generation warfare, that's, you know, exactly what the Q movement is all about, is waking people up, exposing the truth. It's their one of their weapons in this war. So back to the part 9. Kim Clement also had something to say about the Ark of the Covenant, and so when I started diving into the Ark of the Covenant link to Q, I came across those prophecies of Kim Clement. And so let me just do Control F and we'll jump right down to Kim Clement. So I have it linked here in my article. It's a prophecy called the Restoration of David's Tabernacle. Now that really interests me, and it's applicable to Millennial Kingdom and the time that we're at, and obviously the whole notion of that premillennialists have, and everyone thinks there's going to be a third temple, physical temple, rebuilt and all that. Well, Kim Clement is talking about the temple. He's talking about David's tabernacle. And if you look into David's tabernacle, it's a very interesting story. David desperately wanted to build the temple, and Yah said, no, I've decided that you're not going to do that. I'm going to give that, your son is going to do that, but you're not. And so instead, David built a tabernacle. And what's interesting in the kind of the symbolism between a tabernacle and a temple is a tabernacle is open, whereas the temple, right? The temple in the Old Testament, the temple was closed. Only the high priest could enter the inner sanctuary, right? So that's kind of interesting. And if you look into this prophecy, you can and research that, you can learn a bit more about that. But the prophecies that Kim Clement gave relating to the Ark of the Covenant, here's a couple of them. He says, God said, listen to that drum beat. It's the sound of war. But you say, we've had enough war. God said, we're talking about a good fight. We're speaking about a war that I have initiated, says the Lord. It is a war of the Spirit. It is a war of the world. God said, it shall be in such a way that there will be those that will say, look at the nations of the earth. They have cried for revival in the church, but look what God is doing. The tabernacle of David, which has fallen down, is being restored again. What does this mean? I'm continuing to quote Kim Clement. It means, God says, whatever was in the tabernacle of David when it fell down shall be restored back to the earth. And they shall say, is it possible that they have found the Ark of the Covenant? Well, there's what happened when, now this obviously is after, this prophecy was after Ron Wyatt discovered the Ark of the Covenant. But remember, that information has been suppressed, right? It's not, there isn't a vast majority of people like, did he really? Is it possible that they found the Ark of the Covenant?
Yeah.
But now maybe you're starting to see some of the stuff coming out, right? I mean, we've had.
If you were to tell most people that the Ark of the Covenant was found, they'd be like, "Yeah, I saw that movie too."
Yeah, exactly, right. So, and for God says, it shall be that there will be signs of it, and many shall fight it, and they shall say, this cannot be, for it has fallen down. But God says, what was in the Ark of the Covenant is about to be manifested throughout the earth and on Israel's mountaintops. God says, and California's mountaintops, and the mountaintops of America and Europe. And God says, even in the Middle East. God says, there shall be a glorious sound of the trumpet of God as the Lord begins to sound his voice. He goes on again. He repeats himself. Hear that drum beat. God says, it is a drum beat of war. Not of war, but a drum beat of victory. Again, talking about unity amongst the people, warriors of God. It shall not come upon the religious. They shall always fight. They shall always demonstrate, and they shall always say, "This is not enough. It's not good enough." Right. So here's again, unity, and that's one of the things that the Q movement is about unifying people under the ideas of truth and justice, not under like a person or one man. It's a true kind of unity. Let's see here. I'm gonna scroll on through. Again, he's talking about restoring the tabernacle of David, which has fallen. There shall be an unusual and unique move of my spirit, where people will begin to do exploits in my name. Discoveries will be made in a way that you've never imagined. So a lot of the things that are coming out in the Q research and things are, talking about things that you really couldn't imagine. And not all these things, some of these things may be true. I don't know. Like some of these things are in my unconfirmed box. One of those things being med beds, for example, that's in my unconfirmed box. I don't have enough information to kind of say, yeah, I think that's true. But, those are some of the things that are kind of coming out of this whole Q movement. I don't think Q ever mentions med beds. If he does, someone will correct me. But, a lot of stuff like that. All right. So there were, I came across a Substack another Substack in my research, where he talks about this, and I believe I linked that here. Let's see here.
Let me just say while you look at that. Now, you mentioned, I noticed you mentioned this article. You said that the temple being rebuilt and sacrifices being offered again would be an abomination. Yeah. And I don't. Now you said I don't think Yahuwah is going to allow it. I don't know if there's going to be another temple built or not, but I will point out to everybody listening, and I've covered this in the past, that big old mountain they call the Temple Mount over there, where they pray to the Western Wall and the Wailing Wall and all that. Guys, that's not the historical Temple Mount. Now, you could just this is where kind of cognitive dissonance sets in for a lot of people. If you just do the research on this, it's very straightforward. That is a Roman fort. That was Fort Antonia. That was not the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount was on Mount Zion. And in fact, you just read Josephus, and he says that when Rome destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD, he said every single foundation was ripped up, including the temple, except for one foundation remained. Not the Temple Mount, but Fort Antonia. And so the Zionists who are over there now, I am convinced that most of the people on the top know this. It's easy to fool the masses within, but I do not believe that they actually want a temple. If they truly wanted a temple, they would have it. And in fact, in 1967, when they came in and conquered Jerusalem, the first thing they did within an hour or two is they handed over the Temple Mount, aka Fort Antonia, over to the Palestinian Authority, which is like, why would you do that? All that, and go further down this. This is be a little bit of a distraction, but I just want to point this out. To go further down the rabbit hole is that the Judaism today, anybody can look this up. Judaism is the modern day Pharisees. This is on Wikipedia, paragraph 1. The religion of Judaism is the Pharisees. It's the denomination of the Pharisees split off into its own religion. And the Pharisees, they're the ones that created the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, which is where they base their teachings off now. The reason that they don't want a temple is because they would have to hand over authority to the Levitical priesthood and to the Sanhedrin, essentially. And they don't want to do that. They don't want the Torah to be back in control again. They want to hold it. So throwing that out there. Now, I don't know if they're going to build a temple or not, but my point of view, now your point of view, John, is that they won't build a temple. My point of view is that they don't want to build a temple, and they're using it to create this whole situation of tension, to create the problem in the Middle East to begin with. Because if they would just go off to the city of David, where the temple actually was, right next to the Melchizedek temple, and build it there wouldn't be any issue. So anyways.
Yeah.
going
Yeah,
back.
and no, that's a great point. And as a Calvinist, of course, I would say they don't want to build the temple because God doesn't want them to build the temple.
You got me
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. So yeah, I found that part here. So there's a Substack article by a gentleman named Christian American, who goes by Christian American Patriot, and he points out that he wonders if this could be a coded message. And he mentions war, Kim Clemente, in the same prophecy several times, and the same prophecy when he talks about the Ark of the Covenant. And he Christian American Patriot ponders that maybe this is a coded message within that prophecy, war, because if you go to the Ingersoll Lockwood homepage and you click on that link that's right there, it will take you to the Wyatt Archaeological Research or war, and up in the thumbnail of your browser, there it is right there. So just some fascinating connections that I was finding. And then another amazing connection, and I didn't make this connection until I started writing this article, was I had wanted, when I started writing this article, I wanted to put into this article the kind of the what I discovered with Trey Smith's video on the Crimson Worm. And so I started out, after my initial page, I started out with that verse of Psalms 22, 1-6. And kind of around that same time that I'm starting to write this article, I was listening to another a truther or a non, I don't remember which one it was, but in his presentation, he was saying there was it's a presentation on like comms and like how to like kind of decode things. And one of the things that he did was a particular set of numbers that someone had been put out there. He typed those numbers, he spelled those numbers out into gematria. You can go to gematrix.org, or there's various other websites where you can easily calculate the numbers associated with a particular word or phrase in various different ciphers, whether it be simple gematria, which is the one that the Q drops use. Q drops use simple gematria. Q actually taught the anons how to kind of decode their comms by using simple and decode comms that the Trump team and Dan Scavino and et cetera were putting out using simple gematria. So I decided to type in 2216 into gematria to see what those results were, and it came to 202. And now, if you're real quick, I should probably get into this in case someone out there is not familiar with this particular psalm and the Crimson Worm. But it's fascinating. This is one of those little things when I started out my article about things that Yah is weaving into his story, whether it's little Easter eggs, right, that he leaves, for lack of a better term. This is one of those Easter eggs that he left for us in Scripture to find. And this verse where, what does it mean when it says, "I am but a worm, not a man"? Yahushua was certainly a man when he hung on the cross. It's a notable that this statement is made in verse 6, which is the number of man. The common Hebrew word for worm is rima, and is defined as a maggot or worm. However, in Psalm 22:6, the word for worm is tala or tolath, and someone may correct me on my pronunciation there. Now, that particular word is used 43 times in the Old Testament, which 4 and 3 equals 7, which is a number of completeness and perfection. So when you start looking into this worm, it's crimson. It's called the crimson worm because it's it's crimson or blood red dye. It's one of the dyes that is used to make the crimson red color of one of the coverings of the tabernacle, actually. Which now that's linked to Clement's prophecy, linked to the Ark of the Covenant, and you can link the Ark of the Covenant to Q through the Ingersoll Lockwood website, and the fact that President Trump, who is Q plus, has a replica of the Ark of the Covenant in Mar-a-Lago, right? So just all these things. Sometimes as I'm starting to write these articles and I'm getting all these connections, I feel like the guy in that meme who has the conspiracy theorist in the meme who has all the strings, connected behind him, and he's got the cigarette in his hand, and he's like, that's me sometimes. And this particular article's unexpected rabbit hole was one of those. But what's fascinating about this is the female crimson worm, when she's ready to lay her eggs, she'll climb up a tree and she'll hatch her eggs, and then she'll lay her eggs under her body, under the protective shell of her body, and she'll die. And then the larvae, they'll feed off of her for 3 days. After 3 days, she won't die. They'll feed off her for 3 days while she's alive. And after 3 days, she'll die. And her body at that point excretes a crimson or a scarlet dye that stains the wood. And here's some pictures of that here. The baby worms remain crimson color for their entire lives. And that's why they're identified as crimson worms. So you can start seeing some of these Easter eggs now that Yahweh left in his word in the Old Testament, pointing to Yahushua's work on the cross, right? So it on day 4, the tail of the mother worm pulls up into her head, forming a heart-shaped body that is no longer crimson, but is turned into a snow white wax. And reading this just gives you, it does me, it gives me chills. I'm getting goosebumps right now reading about this. It looks like a patch of wool on the tree or fence. It then begins to flake off and drop to the ground, looking like snow. And of course, Isaiah 1:18, come now, let us reason together, saith the Lord. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, toloth, they shall be as wool. I mean, that's powerful. And I didn't even catch this when I first read it, but of course, 1 and 18 is a 19, and 19 is the 19th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, is the Kuf, or the Hebrew Q. So that's another connection right there. But if you spell out 2216, it equals 202 in simple gematria. And I started seeing all these other things that equal 202. I know what you did equals 202. The Most High knows what we did, but out of unrestrained love, 202. The righteous judge, 202. Sent the only begotten Son, 202, to take the punishment we justly deserve. He sent his angel Mary, a servant of the Lord, 202, to announce that you will have a son, 202. The firstborn son, 202, would live a sinless life and be rejected by his people, 202. He would suffer and die, not to save the righteous, 202, but sinners. He would not remain in the tomb. Death could not hold him. He was resurrected from the dead, 202. Showing the world that he, Jesus, the Son of God, 202, is Yahweh, the living God, 202. Because of his death and resurrection, all believers now have forgiveness of sin, 202, a holy purification, 202. And being made white as snow, they can say, he has taken me out of captivity, 202, and into his glorious light. I was blind and now I see, 202. Because of him, I will live forever, 202, singing the praise of his glory, 202. Like, I was blown away. I was blown away as I was discovering these things. And that's where I'm talking about. Like, sometimes the Ruach will send you these things. I didn't go out to find these. I was just led to search the numbers of Psalm 22, 1-6, and it lays out the whole salvation story right here. Right, the whole story of the story of the Gospels is laid out with the numbers 202. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about. I mentioned this last time. I talk about the divine matrix. Like, this is the divine matrix, in my opinion. This is the divine matrix revealing itself here, right? It's not. It's these he's so infinitely powerful and sovereign that he can weave these things in. He weaved into, Psalm and Isaiah, the 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 story of the crimson worm, and tied it into, you know, Yahusha on the cross, and he's sovereign enough and all powerful and all knowing enough that he knows what the English language is going to be in thousands of years, right? And how those numbers are going to line up. He's a mathematical. The universe is he created a mathematical universe, right? And so we shouldn't be surprised when we see these connections. We should be thrilled that we're seeing these connections, I think. Now, but it keeps going. Like this was not the end of the 202s. So when Yahushua was on the cross, right, they erected three signs in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. In the Greek, it reads Iesous Nazarus Rex Iudorium, or INRI, which in English translates to Jesus the Nazarene, King of the Jews, John 19:19. And I made this connection in the article here. Hebrew Q is the 19th letter. So here we have John 19:19, or if you change it to the Hebrew Q, you have JohnQ. In English, Q is 17. So John 17:17 states, "Sanctify them, thy word is truth." INRI, King of the Jews, 202. Lion of the tribe of Judah, 202. Behold, it's the Lamb of God, 202. He shall rule on earth, 202. Every knee shall bow, 202. All will bow before him, 202. He was, is, and is to come, 202. Any questions? that was me, like in my article. Any questions? And so, of course, I had to. I'm like, I'm going to look up Q post 2216, like Psalm 22, 1 through 6. I'm going to look up Q post 2216, and there it is, Q&A, Q. I can't make that up, right? But there's a connection there. So I often get hear thing gematria is satanic, and as I kind of address that in my article a bit, but it's numbers are a fact of, and math is a fact of the universe that he created. It's how you use numbers. You can everything that Yah creates, Satan counterfeits and twists. So you can use what Yah has created and meant for good. You can use it for evil purposes. So it's really how you use numbers that matters. Are you making your life decisions based on numbers? Are you trying to orchestrate things to line up with certain numerology, et cetera? That will lead you to a dark path. But if you simply recognize them when they come along, that's not practicing gematria. That's just recognizing the connections. It's recognizing those little treasures that the Most High weaves into our daily lives to remind us He's right here with us, and to show us that He is a personal God.
Yeah, when I think about gematria, I know there's a lot of people out there saying, it's evil. It's, what's funny is that whenever somebody says something like satanic, is when we have these discussions about the definition of words, we first need to define what the word Satan actually means, all these kind of things. But in terms of numbers, okay, so when somebody says that gematria is evil, it's almost like I feel like they're saying, like, yeah, there's parts on your body that are evil too. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like, numbers is a fact of this cosmos, this universe we live in. And I think it's how the spiritual entities, higher beings, actually communicate through numbers. That could be what we could call that fallen angels. We could say our spiritual controllers, the watchers, all that kind of stuff. But I think the same way goes with the angels on both, the spiritual intel on both sides, the angelic entities, and including Yah himself. It's absolutely incredible. The way numbers, like when I look at gematria, I almost, when you look at how all these numbers just line up on the stage over and over and over again, to the point that you can't even deny it anymore. Like, it's just too many numbers to say it's all a coincidence that just line up. I don't actually think that humans, I know that it's the common idea out there that it's just like our human controllers that are out there putting all these numbers together, and they may be, but I don't think that the common person actually has the time to sit down and dissect all these numbers all the time. I actually think this is just how super powerful people, again, spiritual
Yeah.
entities, communicate with each other. So I think when we look in at this stuff, we're looking into truly brilliant minds. And also, to spin this in a positive way, is that everybody can look back at their life probably and see these patterns that just play out, like these numeric patterns that, like, that Yah did that. That wasn't Satan that did that. That was Yah
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I
Absolutely.
would, so just to
Go
throw
ahead.
out for everyone that's saying this is satanic, just be very careful about what you attribute to Yah that is satanic. Just because the Kabbalah, the Kabbalah people are pulling these numbers out and putting into a system, just because they have the so-called monopoly on this heavenly mystery doesn't mean that they invented it. It doesn't mean that
Yep.
it's theirs.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. I mean, that's a really great point, Noel. I agree with that 100%. So all the 202s, like in the rules of simple gematria, you can remove the zero because zero means nothing. So all those 202s also equal 22, and that's another connection to the eclipse, where if you look at the eclipses over the last 7 years, the first one in 2017, there was another eclipse in 2023, and then we had I think it was October or something like that, and then we had another eclipse just a week or so ago, April 8th. And the if you take the first eclipse in 2017 and the last eclipse in 2024, that creates an X or a Tav. If you look at it, it actually looks more like a Tav than an X in the shape of it. It looks more like the Tav. And so there's a connection there. The Tav is the 22nd letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So there's a connection right there to that eclipse. And if you take all three eclipses and you line them up, it looks like the Hebrew alphabet. And I'll go ahead and pull those up. So here we have the Tav in Paleo, and then the modern Tav, and here is the two eclipses 7 years apart and their path, and it looks just like the Tav. And if we combine the two eclipses that occurred on with the one that occurred on October 14th of last year, we end up with the shape of the Aleph. So he's putting the Bible says that the heavens, the sun and the moon, the stars are made for signs and seasons, right? And so it's a sign that Yah is putting in the heavens. It's something to not be scared of. It's something to investigate. What does it mean? What does the sign mean? Right? The Aleph and the Tav that he's putting over our nation. Another thing that's really fascinating, this is a really fascinating connection here, is if you take the dates of those three eclipses, 8/21, 2017, 10/14, 2023, and 4/8/24, and you add those numbers up, you get 21, 13, and 20, and you add those up, you get 54, which if you mirror 54, you have 45, which is President Trump, but the 45th president. But if I go to Q Post 54, it simply states, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." And that was the title of my part 8, was Hope and a Future. And 5 and 4 equals 9, which this is the 9th article of my series. I'm going to skip through. I know we don't want to go too long here, and kind of get to the end. Another fascinating connection that was made in all this, where I tied all these things together with the eclipse, the Ark of the Covenant, and that is what really. This was what. For me, this is what really, made me fall out of my chair, you could say. Like when I saw that Ingersoll Locker website had posted the link to the White Archaeological Research website, that made me sit up in my chair. And then as we're watching the Ark of the Covenant documentary, myself, my wife, and I are watching it, and we came across something, a little nugget in there that made me fall out of my chair, pretty much. So
That's a dangerous habit too, by the way.
Yeah.
Don't try this at home, but leave this to the professionals.
Yeah, exactly. There was, what was really interesting was in Ron Wyatt's testimony. I call it a testimony of his discovery of the Ark of the Covenant. He talks about the day that he discovered the Ark of the Covenant, and he gives out some very specific numbers. And I've learned that, you know, during my search, that kind of in my researching things and over the past few years, I've learned that when I hear specific numbers, like my ears perk up, and maybe I pay attention to that. Is that something? Is that a connection, right? So there were some very specific numbers and phrases and descriptions of things that Ron presented. He talked about when he describes the moment he first discovered that the chamber that eventually he would find the Ark of the Covenant inside of. And he tells that when he first peered into the chamber, he was looking through a small round hole. And in the center of that hole, from his perspective, hung a large stalactite. So picture you're looking through a small hole. In the center of that hole is hanging a large stalactite on the other side of that hole. And for him, he made the comment this was unusual because stalactites were rare inside of this cavern. And my wife actually made this connection. I didn't make it. She said, pause it. And so, you know, she makes connections often for me. And I did. I turned to her and was like, you know, and she said, you know, a round hole with a line hanging down the center of it. That's what he's describing. He's describing a paleo Q. That was for me, that was instant goosebumps. And here it is, paleo Q, a small hole, a large stalactite hanging down through the center of it. Right. So now, like, you know, from what I see here, like Yah has marked the chamber that held the Ark of the Covenant with a kuf, or the Hebrew Q. So and that was a moment where, like, okay, you know, there are connections here for sure. That it went into my, you know, unconfirmed box. I kind of put it into my confirmed box, so to speak. So you know, one of the first things I do is I go straight to Q drops. I search for gold, because when you think of the Ark Covenant, you think of gold. And there's a Q drop here that mentions gold. It says ancient Egyptians considered gold the skin of the gods. Now it's interesting. There's Egypt that's linked to the Ark of the Covenant, right? After the Israelites escaped the captivity of Egypt, it was in the wilderness that they fashioned the Ark of the Covenant following God's instructions. It says, so ancient Egyptians discovered gold, the skin of the gods, specifically the sun god Ra, and often used it to craft objects of spiritual significance. And so here again, in this Q drop, talking about objects of spiritual significance, you can't argue that the Ark of the Covenant is not an object of spiritual significance. And Q asks, why is this relevant? All right, let's see. Continuing on with some of these connections here. Of course, we have Q post 197. If you add those numbers up, you get 17. The date of the Q drop was November 22nd, which we've got all those 202, which equals 22 numbers. That's 22nd. We got an 11 in there. And 11 is actually a hexadecimal Q, and I talked about that in another article. I show how that is a hexadecimal Q, because hexadecimal 11, if you convert that to decimal, it equals 17 for Q. And of course, 22 is the mark of the Tav, or the mark of the cross. So the Q post, Q post of the date and timestamp. I'll often, when I'm doing these researches and finding these connections, I will look at the date and timestamp of the Q post. Q tells us that dates and timestamps are relevant, and so I look at those. And so the date and timestamp of this Q post, it can be written out as 11/22/2017. this was at 4 p.m. So that it's in military time, that's 16/47/21. And so if you add those numbers up, you get to 154. And so, right there, there's with the rules of gematria, we can isolate the 1. We can add the 5 and the 4 together to get a 9. So then we have a 1 and a 9, or a 19, which 19, the 19th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, is the Kuf, or Q, and that sign was right there in when Ron Ryan discovered the chamber that held the Ark of the Covenant. So I thought that's interesting. I say, right. Q post mentioned in gold and objects of spiritual significance. So this was Q post 197. So okay, I'm going to start searching what other things might equal 197. Q suddenly appears, equals 197. To be blunt, game over, equals 197. And of course, there's a Q post that says to be blunt, game over. Spiritual warfare equals 197. And Q talks a lot about spiritual warfare. It's very, he talks about putting on the full armor of God. He references that passage 12 times, 12 different posts. 12, the biblical meaning of 12 is, it symbolizes God's power and his authority, as well as serving as a perfect governmental foundation, right? There were 12 apostles, 12 tribes, and so on and so forth. So, a lot of these connections, the more these connections I make to the Q drops, and Q says it's biblical, we're living in biblical times, it's biblical. One of the things that Q appeals, and Q research appeals very much to people who love to dive into scripture and cross-reference, because cross-referencing scripture, and it was Burning Bright, who is an anon who puts a lot of good stuff out there. I follow Burning Bright, got a lot of great stuff out there, but he made this connection recently. He talks about how, the people who like to, Q was really targeting was targeting people who, spent their whole lives cross-referencing scripture and research scripture, because cross-referencing the Q drops and things is very similar. It's a very similar process. And when Q says it's biblical, that has caused me to cross-reference Q drops with scripture. And I do that often in my articles, and I show these connections between Q and scripture, and they're all over the place. And this is yet another connection here. Couple other things that equals 197 is a dimensional portal equals 197. There's a lot of theories out there about the Ark of the Covenant and how maybe it's a dimensional portal. And it kind of is, really, if you think about it, right? It is like that's where Yah resided among his people, was in the Ark of the Covenant, right? Through the Ark of the Covenant, it's right. Essentially, it's a dimensional portal. I mean, you can make that claim. Yeah. And this one is a personal connection, and I can't explain it other than it's it's an amazing experience of Yah showing, like, just giving me a confirmation that I'm on the right path, or that that's how I take it. It could be taken some other way, but that's how I take it. And that's my heart will go on equals 197. And it just so happened that there was a metal cover of that song, My Heart Will Go On, by a gentleman named Dan Vask. And that appeared in my YouTube history within a week prior to making this connection that I made in this article here. But I had not watched it. I had not watched that video, but it was there in my watch history. And I was looking in my watch history for something else that I had watched previously, and I saw it. And I said, well, that's strange. I guess I should watch it, right? So I did, and it's pretty good. Like I left the link here if you want to check it out. It's I think it's better than Celine Dion's rendition, but um, but that's, to me, that's kind of how that's another example of I see of how the Divine Matrix works. I didn't go searching out this song because of the number 197. Yah knew ahead of time that I would find that in my watch history, even though I never watched it before. And he knew that the gematria result, when I was looking for what also equals 197, that I would, make that connection. Cue to the Ark of the Covenant. He put the song in the playlist. I think he put the song in the playlist for me. And so, I say here, that's what I'm talking about when I say if you pay attention to the Divine Matrix, if you pay attention, the Divine Matrix will reveal itself to you. It's Yah saying, I'm right here. I care about all the details, even the tiniest, most minute ones, and I want to share them with you, my child.
I like how you call it the Divine Matrix. I don't want to. I wanted you to kind of fish your point, but what I would love to, I guess, get at is what are you ultimately saying about? I mean, James O'Keefe is kind of the tip off. He's at Mar-a-Lago, and he's posing in front of an Ark of the Covenant. Well, okay, so let me look at you didn't go over this. I wanted to show what was it on Twitter or where was it that he showed this?
I believe he posted it originally on his Instagram, if I remember correctly.
Okay. Yeah, he posted a picture. I'm trying to scroll up here on my own file here, and it's like way up at the top. So, okay. And there was a conversation that went down.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? Somebody asked. Okay. Somebody asked.
I'll scroll up to that part there.
Someone said, a Cowboy W2B says, interesting that James O'Keefe posted a picture standing next to the Ark of the Covenant at Mar-a-Lago. And then, let's see, what is James O'Keefe's answer? I'm trying to get at this here. Maybe you can go over this real quick.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, yeah. So what I would be curious about is like, what is the idea is, what is your idea on this? Do you think that Trump has a replica or the actual Ark of the Covenant?
No clue. I'm not even going to. It wouldn't surprise me if it's the actual. If I had to like lean one position, I might lean that way, that it's the actual. But I don't know.
So if let's just play around with this. So if he does, so Ron White goes and discovers it, was it 1982, 1983? Coincidentally, like right when Raiders of the Lost Ark comes out, I think the same year he goes and finds it. And it was the same thing with Noah's Ark. While the rest of the world was watching Star Wars in 1977, he goes off and, does something much better. He discovers Noah's Ark. So let's say that it was since the 82, 83, because you figure, I mean, Ron White goes down there, he makes this claim, the powers that should not be hear this. I personally think, just like the temple, I think they don't really want it. I really don't. And he talked about how an angel was there guarding it. He actually saw this angel on multiple occasions. Like he would just be down in the chamber with him. And I mean, I totally think that like that angel would have like just melted people's faces off if they, attempted to pull it out they weren't supposed to. And I'm talking about the powers that should not be. But it's so let's assume he does have it, just for sake of argument. What does that mean? What does that mean to you?
I don't know that I've thought about it, but I guess, the first thing that would pop into my head is, it probably has something to do with Kim Clement's prophecy, with the tabernacle of David being restored. It would kind of tie in with, kind of my whole theory and what I've been putting out in these articles and putting out the supporting information for my theory in these articles about how we are currently in what I think we're currently in the middle of of Matthew 13:37-43, which is where the sons of the wicked one, the sons of the evil one, the all the lawbreakers, all the causes of sins, things that cause sin, stumbling blocks. Yahusha said that they're going to be removed from the earth, like all of them. That's what he said. So that's a promise, and I haven't seen anywhere in history, even in hidden history, even during the millennial kingdom. There's so many prophecies in the Old Testament that most of us would agree that those are talking about the millennial kingdom. And even during the millennial kingdom, there is still sin. There is there is still death, right? But so even before the millennial kingdom, not all causes of sin were removed, not all the wicked were removed. I would make it the case. I think that a lot were removed before the millennial kingdom, but not all of them. So I do think that we're still in our future, because we still have death with us, and because the psalmist, Paul quotes the psalmist when he says, or references the Psalm 110:1, when he says that, and he must reign until all of his enemies are made a footstool for his feet, the last enemy being death. We still have death with us, so he's still reigning. His enemies are still being made a footstool.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I agree with everything you're saying, and in fact, I mean we've talked about this, and one of the things about the millennial kingdom is that sin still existed, death still existed, and we still have death among us, and so we're waiting ultimately on the restoration of all things, including the end of sin, the end of death, and this raises the question with me with the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the fascinating thing about the Ark of the Covenant versus Noah's Ark, I specifically started this discussion tonight talking about Noah's Ark and how I recently was researching it. And I believe the evidence is there that the residents of the kingdom during that time all knew where Noah's Ark was. Josephus says it in the first century, they all knew where it was. People were going there and visiting it. And yet by the time you get to the short season, our controllers shut that down, erased, scrubbed it, right? But when you go there to the ruins that Ron Wyatt showed, he shows that the people of the medieval era all knew it was there. Now, I say that because the Ark of the Covenant, as far as I'm concerned, was always hidden, and that nobody really knew where it was until 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And why is that important? Well, because what Ron White found on there was actually the blood of Mashiach. And that is literally the blood of the lamb sprinkled on the mercy seat. Now, that, of course, that right there is what is holding back the ultimate anger, or this is what is, ultimately forgiving us of our sins. The fact that it's our high priest, or Melchizedek priest, who has sprinkled the blood on there, thereby allowing us to, enter into forgiveness again, just as the high priest did year after year after year on the Day of Atonement. But he had to do it every single year, right? Whereas this was a one-time thing. So the question I'm asking myself, and this is why I'm bringing this up, is must the Ark of the Covenant remain hidden until all things are fulfilled? And can the blood be scrubbed off, right? Because it was the blood was the father, he's like, okay, I'm good, the blood's on there, you can take the hose, you can scrub it off now, I'm good, it was on there one time? Or does it need to remain on there until all things are fulfilled, thereby the need to hide it? And so I just bring that up for consideration. That's one of the things I'm thinking, like, if the powers that should not be, or the white hats, the good guys, or whatever, if they have the ark, does it have the blood on there? Are they doing anything to scrub it off, or are they keeping it on there?
That's a great point. If and I hadn't considered that before, but if that would I would say then no, this is a replica, because of course I can't see it from this angle, but if I agree with you, I don't think that the blood is going to be removed until it's no longer needed. Right?
Now, and in fact, that was one of the things about Ron White's story that I was having a hard time with for the longest time. Where he talked about there was like some sort of earthquake and the blood comes through the earth and trickles down and goes onto it. I'm like, that seems a little far fetched to me. I was thinking of a scenario that after he resurrected, that as the high priest, he literally went down there and took his blood and sprinkled it on. I saw no problem with that. And I was trying before this interview to pull up a actual document that I pulled out of the Middle Ages, the medieval period. And they're not even talking about the Ark of the Covenant. I don't believe that they had any knowledge it was hidden down there, but they actually talk about how at the crucifixion, when Mashiach is on the cross, that this earthquake happened that split the ground. And it specifically said the witnesses there saw his blood trickle down into this huge crack that went down in the ground, and nobody knew where the blood went. And I'm like, what in the world? I couldn't, like, talk about falling out of your chair. That was like a fall, because like you said, you take this information, you put it on the shelf, you don't know what to do with it until you come across stuff like this. And that's where, in my mind, Ron White's story was verified, that here you have an actual document and account talking about the witnesses that saw the blood go into the crack down into the cavern below.
And that's aligns with scripture. The Gospels talk about that there was an earthquake and all that kind of stuff. Yep.
So, all right. So now I didn't want to deter you. I always, I'm trying not to jump in because I know how hard it is to pick up the pieces after I, interrupt and jump in. So one thing I would be interested. So we kind of talked about the Ark of the Covenant. You're not really sure if Trump has it or not, but you know that you're seeing connections between Trump and Q and the Ark itself and Ron Wyatt. You had mentioned time travel a little bit earlier, and I'm wondering I've talked about this in the past, and I have my theories on time travel. This has taken me a long time to come to this. For the longest time, I'm like, no, there's no such thing as time, as a dimension. It's all fake. It's all a deception of NASA, all that kind of stuff. And I finally come around in the last couple of years, 2 or 3 years, really, to going, yeah, I think something like that did happen. But I would be curious to get your thoughts on it. Like, when you think about time travel and Trump, what's going through your mind?
Yeah, I did get into this in part 6, I believe it was. But yeah, I would I think it's very possible, and maybe even likely. I used to think time travel wasn't possible until I discovered it's in the Bible. And I'm like, well, okay, it is possible. The angel that visits Daniel, the angel talks about how he came from a future point in time, and he had to stop on his journey to Daniel to he was battling the angel of, I can't remember which nation it was.
The Prince of Persia.
Prince of Persia, thank you. And then another angel had relieved him, so he could come back and deliver a message further back in time, deliver a message to Daniel, and then he had to go back and continue that fight. So that's one instance. There's you can make the connection between John and his vision of the temple, and was it Ezekiel's vision of the temple? You can see how they're both they're each describing the other person that they're seeing. It's in their visions. There's teleportation, like described, like Yahusha, like I forget, was it Philip who was like teleported instantly? He was in another town. The disciples and Yahusha were instantly on the other side of the lake. Talks about that. So yeah, there's a biblical case to be made for time travel.
Even in the in like the Aramaic Targum and others, it talks about Yaakov, and of course this would be Jacob, when he's going back to Laban to get a bride. Of course, he's going for Rachel. He ends up with Leah. Long story. But according to the Aramaic Targum, that was a journey that should have taken, I don't know how long, 40 days. I don't really know. But he apparently got there in like 1 day. By the time the sun set, he just miraculously showed up. And it's like the idea they kind of went through some sort of portal as well to get there. So yeah, there's quite a few examples of that. Now, from my perspective, is that all of these are. And you also talked about in your book. You didn't bring it up tonight, I don't think. Elijah and Moshe, how both of them fasted 40 days, Mount Sinai, and they happen to be the ones that were transfigured with
Right.
Messiah in the future. And I know your position. I think it's the same as mine. That they that when Messiah was there, he was actually speaking with them in their actual time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that was part of the miracle, which, of course, that just then, shows my view that as well, that Yahusha is Yahuwah or Yahuwah,
Hmm.
that they're the same, the son of the Father. But from my perspective, is that all these incidents are, they're obviously miraculous. It is Yah actually somehow, like, almost like a metamorphosis in the spiritual realm that he's using, right? Like, this isn't like, let's jump in a DeLorean or a phone booth
Right.
and time travel. So from my perspective, because I think time travel is happening, I think it has happened. But when I talk about it, I'm not saying like people are physically, like in Terminator, like, going through time. I almost think it's like they're sending information. They're somehow able to send information, like non-material information, from one people, transport it from one people to group to another. But that's just my view. So
No, I agree with that 100%. If you think about it, um, if even if you have more information, let's say you are the Q team and Q says we have it all. So you have all the information. You've gathered all this information from these various, from uh, the various things that the deep state's been putting into place to spy on all of us. Well, the Q team has been using that to spy on all of them too. So they have it all. So they have all the information. If you have all the information and the Q drops reference Project Looking Glass, which is kind of related. It's related to an informational time travel element, right? Looking Glass is a program where you can plug in, like different decisions that you would make, and it will, you can see how it will affect the future. So if you have all the information, or even more information than anybody else, you can know that certain things are very likely or inevitable. You can then make decisions in our time, in the time of people who don't have all the information. You can make decisions that to them may look weird, right? But are based on what you know will happen in the future. Or you can, and that's kind of how I see some of the things in the Q drops being, when the Q talks about future proofs past and stuff like that. It's talking about how future news will prove past drops, and that's happened. That's happened over and over again with the Q drops.
yeah, okay, good. I did want to know, we're kind of running up on time, and there's probably a lot you can talk about. I think you got the most of the article. One of the things I wanted to bring up, now this was an interesting eclipse for probably all of us, but this year, for those of you who know that I've been trying the different calendars each year, the different biblical calendars, and figuring out what is the right one I'm supposed to be on. I've been trying 2 or 3, or over the last so many years, and so keeping the feast this year, the Day of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Passover, happened to fall amazingly. Passover was April 7th, and the high Sabbath Day of Unleavened Bread fell on April 8th for me this year, which just so happened to be the day of the eclipse. So that was really interesting. But then I had to look, I guess it was April 13th. So it wasn't exactly 7 days later. It wasn't my next day. It wasn't the next high Sabbath, which fell on a Sunday for me this year. But Iran did an unprecedented uh, attack on Israel. I guess it was the first time, I think, ever that they officially shot missiles at them. I can't remember how many they shot. Like, it was like 100 and 150 or something like that. Almost every single one of them were shot down. And then I've heard reports that if they really wanted to attack Israel, they would have launched 4, 5, even 700 of the missiles at once, and they were trying to give some message or whatever. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. And we were talking a little bit about this beforehand, so I'm wondering if you could kind of tie this all into it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's easily to make that connection with Ark of the Covenant and Israel, and so yeah, it's definitely, I think, relevant. So I might have to set the stage a little bit to kind of explain my my position, my perspective on this. I believe that there is a worldwide you can call it a sovereign alliance. It's an alliance of different world leaders who they want to make they it's a sovereign alliance. They are they have deep state problems and central bank problems in their in their own country, and there's a group of world leaders and a group of military personnel and that have created a sovereign alliance who are combating this worldwide deep state and central banking system. And so that's the war that we are in right now. That's World War IV that we are in right now. And so if you have that, if you have that as a foundation, and that's tied in with the Q drops, this worldwide alliance.
In World War III, in World War III, your idea of World War III was the Cold War, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just clarifying for people who maybe didn't see the last interview.
Yeah. So with that in mind, if you remember back to President Trump's first year, he did a worldwide tour, and he went to Saudi Arabia, right? And
was that was that creepy photo with the globe when he went to Saudi Arabia? Was that his first year?
That was, I don't think the globe was his first one. I think that was another tour. The first year, they did the sword dance, and they gave President Trump the sword, which only the king of Saudi Arabia gets to hold the sword in the sword dance, and President Trump was there holding the sword. Shortly after he left, there was a whole bunch of upheaval in Saudi Arabia, and a whole bunch of there was mass arrests in Saudi Arabia. There were, really, really evil. Crown Prince Alawid was arrested. A whole bunch of people of the royal family were arrested. Prince Solomon was elevated to the Crown Prince position, and he has been a strong ally of President Trump throughout his term. He was instrumental in the Abrahamic Accords, and Saudi Arabia and Israel have been working to normalize relations, and they've been sharing intelligence with each other. Saudi Arabia has been sharing intelligence with the United States, with Israel, and Saudi Arabia is the key player in the Middle East, and they used to be the key player of the cabal, of the deep state. They were the one of the three pillars was Saudi Arabia, and the oil and everything that they controlled. And now that pillar has been removed. Prince bin Salman is part of the sovereign alliance. If you look at what happened what's been going on since President Trump left office, and you kind of have to see all these things. You have to put all these connections together to see that there's a pattern here. Shortly after, in 2021, we had the Afghanistan pullout. Well, President Trump had made the Doha Agreement deal with the Taliban when he was in office. Basically, it's a Taliban. You're going to fight and eliminate ISIS in Afghanistan. We're gonna leave Afghanistan to you. You will be a sovereign nation of Afghanistan, right? So, and part of that agreement was the United States was going to be giving them, funding them, and helping them, arming them to carry on this fight against ISIS. We pulled out. It was a horrible travesty of leadership. We had there was an ISIS attack. It wasn't a Taliban attack that killed those 13 service members and hundreds of civilians. It was an ISIS attack. And we left behind, everyone knows, we left behind $84 million worth of equipment, which interesting number, 84, 48. The Eclipse was on 48. But so $84 million worth of equipment was left for the Taliban. Now, optically for Biden, this looks horrible. For Biden, that whole thing looked horrible. There are a lot of people that, like, I know I have people at my work who were, like, for them, they that was what woke them up, was that whole thing. Unfortunately, it came at the cost of our young men's lives, but which that is can be fully hung on the Biden administration and the decisions they made there in that pullout. But now you have the sovereign alliance in Afghanistan, and if that had happened under a Trump administration, that Trump would have probably made better decisions as far as how would not have been pulling out the military first, or leaving civilians, all that kind of stuff. So, but the Biden administration is digging their own grave there. Now look at what's been going on with Ukraine as well over the last couple of years, right? So after Afghanistan, we had Ukraine. Putin invades Ukraine, right? That's the narrative. Putin is invading Ukraine. Putin's soon going to be marching all over Europe. We have to stop him. We have to, send money and weapons and armaments and munitions over to Ukraine. If that had happened under the Trump administration, that would have been bad optics for President Trump. Keep in mind that in any sort of informational war, in any sort of war, and in just the world we're living in, optics are important. And Q in the drops points out repeatedly that optics are extremely important. But this happens under Biden's watch. Again, it looks really bad for Biden. Trump is a peacemaker, right? When he was in office, this didn't happen. You can see that there was a sovereign alliance between with Trump and with Putin. They got along. Of course, the deep state's trying to say that Putin is controlling Trump, but I would say it's the other way around, probably. But and maybe it's not even the other way around. I don't think either one of them are controlling each other. I think it's more along the lines of they're making a deal, right? Trump is a businessman and he knows how to make deals. That's what he's done all his life. So part of this is that Trump has made a lot of these deals with these sovereign to kind of help form this sovereign alliance. So the Afghanistan conflict, there's a difference between the narrative and the actuals. There was a difference between the narrative and the actuals in Afghanistan. The narrative was what it was, but the actuals were, we were honoring our agreements with the Doha Accords, arming the Taliban and furnishing the Taliban with so that they could defeat ISIS and be set up as a sovereign nation. If you think about it, that's the counter. That's the opposite of what the globalists want. Is it's a one world government and they control everything through the central bank system and everything else. So what's the opposite of that? The opposite of that is a lot of sovereign leaders who they want to make their country great again, coming together, making a deal to defeat the deep state, to defeat the central banks in their nations. And it is a world war. It's a world war that we're in. So Putin invades Ukraine under Biden's watch. Now there's the narrative versus the actual. The narrative is, we've been seeing these crazy narratives like, the Russian army is being depleted, all these things. Well, what was the actual that was happening? And, through following truthers, following anons, people who've been doing, their own research outside of what the mainstream media feeds you, you will know that there were that the Ukraine is a C_A playground. It is there's a lot of Biden corruption and tied to Ukraine. There were a lot of bio labs that has been admittedly set up in Ukraine in these regions, in the Donbass and what have you, on Russia's border, biolabs, and you can, that's admitted by our, State Department in testimony to Congress. And of course they say biolab, that, obviously we know that really means a bioweapons lab. And then you have a lot of really bad players, the Azov battalion. They're a bunch of Nazis, literal Nazis, in the Azov battalion. So while the narrative has been Russia's losing this war, that's actually far from the truth. It's the opposite of the truth. The Azov battalion is now all but decimated. The leaders of the Azov battalion I just saw something that came out recently. The leaders of the Azov battalion are starting to question Zelensky, if he's really on their side, or has he just been throwing them to the meat grinder, right? So again, if you think about the Matthew 13 passage, all the wicked are going to be removed from the earth. I'm saying this is what we're seeing right now. We're seeing that happening. We're with this sovereign military alliance. From my perspective, Yahweh works through his people. He's done that time and time again. He works through people, and not only his people, but he'll work through a heathen. He'll work through King Cyrus. He'll work through Nebuchadnezzar. He'll work through even people that aren't his children. So the narrative versus the actual in Ukraine. And in fact, there was a U.S. general in Congress recently who was testifying that the Russian military has actually increased by 50% since the start of the Ukraine war. Their numbers aren't dwindling; they're bigger. So again, you can't believe what the mainstream news is feeding you. You have to go find the other information of what's really going on. So with that as setting the stage for what's happening in Israel and Iran. So what spawned this attack from Iran into Israel? What was the kind of the cause of that? So of course we had October 7th, right? Where we had the Iron Dome, the great and vaunted Iron Dome, the Israeli defenses. They were defeated by flying go-karts, right? That's what we were told. And so there was this attack on Israel, on the Gaza, and that whether it was real or whether it was staged, whether it was Israel's 9/11 and the government let it happen, the actual of it is it gave Israel permission to take out Hamas. Permission meaning socially, politically, right? They now had permission from the world, just like we had permission from the world after 9/11 to do what we did. And while I'm not justifying what we did it anyways, I participated in it. I'm not justifying it, but I was there. And there were some really evil, sick people that we were up against, and it was every bit a supernatural fight as it was a physical fight over there. And so, same thing. Hamas is a Iranian-backed organization, and which means it is a C_A backed organization. It's a deep state backed organization, and funded organization. And so now Israel has the permission to take out Hamas, and that's what they have done. They've taken them out. So Iran responds. Israel then then because of the attacks, Israel took out an Iranian general who is tied to Hamas. They took him out in Damascus with an airstrike or something like a missile strike, something like that. And so now Iran responded. And here's the thing. Iran announced ahead of time that we're going to shoot a whole bunch of stuff. We're going to send X number of missiles and X number of drones, and we're going to do this. They were announcing this in the news. Like, everyone knew it. Everyone knew it was coming. And President Trump recently gave an interview with Maria Bartiromo where he talked about how when they had taken out someone that was an Iranian, and I forget which one it was, one of the people that President Trump's administration had taken out during his term. I think it was Soleimani. No, it wasn't. I forget the guy's name, but the Iranian leader called him and said, in order to save face with our population, we have to strike back. We're going to send missiles. We're going to send missiles to this U.S. military base, but we're not going to hit the military base. We're going to hit beside your military base. And I'm warning. This is. And President Trump, okay, I get it. I understand. Go ahead. And so they did. It's the same thing here, except perhaps they don't have that direct relationship that they did with Trump with Netanyahu, but they essentially said ahead of time, we're going to do this. They sent missiles and things that they knew were not going to be successful at all. Now, you could make the claim, you could say, well, maybe they were just testing out the defenses so that they could find the weak spots so that they could then send, an actually effective, like nuclear weapons or what have you, a nuclear strike that would be effective. Sure, potentially. And in fact, the Iranians are now warning that that they are in fact going, essentially, that if Israel does anything, that's what they're going to do. Well, okay, so by doing that, what does that give Israel permission to do? Permission socially, politically, in global politics. They're giving Israel permission to take out the Iranian nuclear program, a preemptive strike. Yeah. Okay. So you have the players here on the board. You have bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who is basically, telling Iran, don't escalate this. You have Joe Biden, who's telling Netanyahu, he's whispering don't or whatever that's his speech, right? But you have this scenario where and what is the Iranian nuclear program? It's funded by the C_A. It's funded by the deep state, right? You have deep state assets all around the world being taken out systematically. It's a systematic destruction of the old guard, is what Q would say. You have those being taken out all from Afghanistan to Ukraine to the Middle East. And what happens when you have a Middle East that does not that has an Iran that is no longer a destabilizing force in the region? You have a real opportunity there for actual sovereign nations coming together, making deals, and doing business and living peacefully, right? So I think, from my perspective, that's what I see going on. And that's probably not a very popular perspective. A lot of people would rather prescribe to the doomer scenario.
Yeah,
but
that is fascinating. I'm going to point out that, I don't know if you see on the screen here, that just 9:27, so 40 minutes ago, since we've been talking, that Israel apparently has retaliated against Iran, and the details are haven't come out yet, but apparently they've done something. So
yeah,
well, I'm sure by the time we wake up in the morning and over this weekend, we'll see plenty more developing. But it's interesting. And one thing that we should probably kind of close shop, and this was all really great tonight. But the one thing that I really connect with so much of what you're saying is that I'm not a doom and gloom guy either. And I've stated this many times before, that when I woke up and I came into this movement, it seems like forever ago now. I came in during the Sandy Hook era, when there was all the gun drills, and I came in with the FEMA camps, and we're all going to be rounded up and thrown it. That might happen. I don't know. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but that was like a very real reality. It was supposed to happen at any given time, and then Jade Helm happened, all this kind of stuff. And it's interesting now to see a very different perspective change. Like, they have this script, and then this idea that these just other entities, other whatever you want to call them, the Anons, whatever you want to call them, came in and changed the game plan. I think that's just a fascinating narrative, and I guess I'll just have to see how it plays out. But I have more of a positive spin on our future as well, and I also appreciated that with the Eclipse, that it wasn't just a doom and gloom thing. That, I mean, from my end, from my perspective, looking at starting with September 23rd, the eclipse happened in August of 2017, and we've seen all these people just waking up and coming into this new spiritual paradigm, and that is Yah working. That's just, it's an incredible thing. So I do think that I could see a judgment situation happening, but it would be almost like a separation of the wheat and the tares. The judgment is very likely going to be just people being handed over to the desires of their own heart, really. Like the people that are just doubling down to this whole thing and refusing to wake up, refusing to see the truth, that we may, that for me, that's a scary, that's the most terrifying thought of all, really, is for people, for the separation of the sheep and the goats, and the goats to, as you would like this in C.S. Lewis terms, that they would become dumb animals again, that they would, anyways.
Great, excellent points. I totally agree with that. And if the wheat and the tares, it's the tares that are removed first, and so go ahead.
That's something that there's so much paranoia going around right now, and people, they'll call me up or they'll email me and they want this response out of me. They're like, it's all coming to a head right now, and it's all going to happen. And my question for them, I'll let them rant sometimes for 20 minutes, and then I'll be like, okay, well, what do you want from me? Like, what do you expect from me? Because, like, what am I supposed to do about this? Because I'm already out there telling people about, to repent and to stop transgressing the commands, these kind of things. And the fact of the matter is, like, you look at Psalm 1, it's one of my favorite chapters in the Bible, and it talks about those who delight on the Torah of Yahweh day and night. And it says that they will be a tree planted by the waters, and that the wicked are not so. They're the chaff that are blown away in the wind. And there's always this idea in the Bible that, like, this is where I part ways with the whole rapture theology, or the doctrine, because they're all waiting to be taken out of the world. It's like, no. Like, you don't want to be the ones taken out of the world. The wicked are the ones that are time and again taken away, and the righteous, this is our earth. This is for us to inherit, for the righteous to inherit. So,
absolutely. The coast, the Bible says the coastlands wait for his Torah, right? It's going to happen. It's a promise.
All right. Well, JohnQ, I always enjoy these articles you turn out, and if you feel inspired to write another one, we'll definitely have to bring you on again. This has been great. I know a lot of people really appreciate this and enjoy it, and I enjoy just sitting here and listening to you talk, because this is, my this is my opportunity to get caught up on all things Anon and hear you guys' perspective. So, any last words?
Would it be all right if I just read the last, like, maybe page and a half or 2 pages, because I think it'll wrap up our conversation really well of this article. And if
all right, I put it back to your screen, so read it.
Awesome. All right. Matthew 13:37-43 states that the Son of Man will send his angels into the world at the end of the age to remove the tares from the harvest field and destroy them. Ask yourself, how do you remove all the wicked who are in charge of the various aspects of society? from the economic, religious, government, entertainment, medical, and education sectors, just to name a few, without society itself collapsing into chaos, thus harming the wheat. As I have stated before, it makes the most sense that it be some sort of covert, behind the scenes operation, a silent war, something that if you were not paying attention, you might not even notice. Then it would probably make the most sense to slow roll it out to the public while waking them up to just how evil and corrupt everything is around them. Perhaps 1 month we learn of, oh, I don't know, just for grinsies, let's say we learn of the death of maybe a Prince Philip. Then 17 months later, we learn of the death of, let's say, a Queen Elizabeth. And then maybe 17 months later, we learn of the death of a Jacob Rothschild. Would there be any clues about what is going on? Revelation 20 speaks to the camp of the saints being surrounded by the nations of the earth that Satan has gathered from the four corners of the earth, or the four cardinal directions of the compass, with all hope seemingly lost. A reference to Gog and Magog is given, which I show in part 5, is a flashback to the events surrounding the Esther story, the 17th book of the Bible, I might add, to paint a picture for the reader of what to expect. In that story, the children of Yah are surrounded, cut off. The enemy has laid their plans, erected their gallows, and initiated the attack. But with Yah, hope is never lost. The enemy's plans boomerang on them. They were destroyed by their own weapons and hung by their own gallows. They learned the hard way that Yahweh is the absolute sovereign ruler of the universe. Perhaps by surrounding the camp of the saints, the enemies of Yahweh walk right into a trap of their own making, and he has them right where he wants them. Easier pickings for the removal from the earth? I grant there is some speculation on my part, but I am thinking there would be clues, right? The Camp of the Saints, 202. Gathering of the Nations, 202. Compass Directions, 202. The Army of Darkness, 202. God, we need your help, 202. Hope is never lost, 202. Q given plan by angels, 202. Secret space program, maybe that's related, 202. The Trump Tower, 202. Donald Trump chosen, 202. Destroy the tares, 202. Execute all cabal members, 202. Game over Rothschild, 202. The cult of the snake is dead, 202. Reset for the win Q, 202. Good things take time, 202. 3331 equals 202. Q post 3331. You are witnessing the systematic destruction of the old guard. May 2019 kickoff, start offense. Enjoy the show, Q. Offense, the shoes are now off, 202. March 26, 202. Q post 3899, March 26, 2020. The silent war continues, Q. July 31 equals 202. Q post 1778 on July 31. The world is about to change, Q. Time to clean the earth, 202. Save Israel for last, 202. Q post 916, which is March 10th of 2018. We are saving Israel for last. Very specific reason, not mentioned a single time, Q. 172 equals 202. Q post 172. Good will always defeat evil, Q. Satan shits himself, 202. A story for the ages, 202. How many coincidences, 202. Q post 3440, July 17, 2019. How many coincidences before mathematically impossible for non-patriots, Q.
All right. Well, that's good. Thank you, JohnQ. And I've said this a couple times, but anything else you want to add and before we close shop tonight?
No, just thank you so much for having me, Noel. I really appreciate that you share your platform, and I really enjoy these times, and looking forward to another one.
Yeah, so you guys all know where to find him, and all his articles can be found, of course, on my websites. And of course, one more time, John, you want to throw out there where you can be found other than the Unexpected Cosmology?
Yep. On Twitter, JohnQ Adamso. On True Social, John_Q_Adams.
All right. All right. Well, good night, everybody. And for those of you who've made this far, who are still listening, I invite you all out to my tour portions tomorrow, Friday night. We do it at 9 p.m. Eastern Time live. And of course, we take a whole year to go through the first 5 books of the Bible. And we're in Leviticus right now. So I think my favorite comment of the night by the commenters where he said, oh man, I'm gonna miss. He said, so we were talking about numbers, and he said my favorite book is Leviticus. So I thought that was kind of funny. Anyways, good night, everybody.